You're a writer, so I thought you must be interested in patterns of human behavior. Writers are supposed to appreciate something for what it is, before they hand down a judgment. Besides, I wanted to talk about it with someone. The way I'm explaining it might be a little weird, I guess. The world's full of barns that are almost waiting for me to burn them down. This dialogue is taken from Haruki Murakami's 1983 short story, Barn Burning. First published in English in 1992, it tells the story of an unnamed protagonist and his strange relationship with a young woman. Lee Changdong's 2018 thriller Burning is an adaptation of this Murakami story. The film received a hugely positive response from both critics and audiences alike. In the wake of Bong Joon-ho's Parasite winning Best Picture at the Oscars, Korean films are starting to attract attention from all over the world. With a runtime of 148 minutes, Burning's pace is just slow enough to capture the feeling of a Murakami novel, something that has eluded previous attempts to adapt his writing into film. 2010's Norwegian Wood is an oft-cited example of why it is almost impossible to translate his ponderous, reflective novels into a movie. Rather than adapting the short story directly, Lee Changdong expands on Murakami's work and brings his own artistic flair and thematic biases. The resultant film is simultaneously a meditation on the effects of South Korea's rampant consumerism, a character study, and a chilling thriller that stays with you long after the credits roll. Burning begins in Seoul, when Jong-soo, an aspiring novelist in his mid-20s, meets Hae-mi, a young woman who grew up in a small farm town outside the city where Jong-soo has recently returned to live. Hae-mi encourages Jong-soo to ask her on a date, and the two meet one evening after she gets off work. They have sex in her apartment, and afterwards she tells him that she's going away on a vacation, and that she'd like him to feed her cat. A few weeks later, Hae-mi returns, having befriended another South Korean, Ben, whom she met at the Nairobi airport. The three start hanging out on a regular basis, with Jong-soo growing visibly jealous of the older, well-to-do Ben. One night at Jong-soo's family farm, Ben shares a joint with the protagonist and Hae-mi, then makes an interesting confession to Jong-soo after the young woman falls asleep.
가끔 비닐하우스를 태운다고요. 난 비닐하우스를 태우는 취미가 있어요.
Not long after this, Hae-mi disappears, leaving no trace of where she may have gone. Jong-soo begins to investigate her absence, coming to suspect that Ben is somehow involved. Lee's treatment seems to have the Murakami formula down to a T. The listless protagonist, strange circumstances, a mystery that's often left unsolved or ambiguous. It is this ambiguity that makes Burning a true masterpiece that stays with the viewer long after the screen fades to black. Before we discuss how it works in Burning, it's important to understand the famous thought experiment, Schrödinger's cat. Suppose I give you a sealed box. I'll tell you that inside the box is a cat and a poison pellet. If you open the box, the cat will be either alive or dead. If you don't open it, however, the cat exists in neither or both states. This paradox is often used to help visualize quantum mechanics, but it's also particularly useful in explaining the power of ambiguity in storytelling. By withholding information, the director or author pushes the narrative responsibility onto us, the viewer. Too often, films treat the audience as a passive observer. All the information is given, and we sit there absorbing it. Burning lets us make our own choice as to our interpretation of the film, and it's all the more powerful for it. In the film, Hae-mi explains the little hunger and great hunger. Little hunger is the physical, the need to eat, the need for fleeting entertainment or impermanent satisfactions. Great hunger, however, is the search for meaning in one's life. Hae-mi can be read in several ways. On the surface, she is very similar to Jong-soo, young, underemployed, and without any significant prospects. Yet when questioned about her career, she seems to genuinely enjoy living in the moment. Her pursuit of the art of pantomime echoes her own need to live in a fantasy, to remove herself from the material concerns that both trap Jong-soo and free Ben. Ultimately, her disappearance is only shocking to Jong-soo, because he is obsessed with finding meaning where there is none. While Ben's friends are content with the pursuit of their own little hungers, with their consumerist tendencies insulating them from the existential horrors of reality, Ben seems at peace with himself. This suggests that he has in fact recognized and sated his great hunger. Perhaps the burning of greenhouses is the meaning that he has found, and this is what Jong-soo's vision really means. Or perhaps he was simply born without a great hunger, and exists only as a void in the world. Jong-soo is consumed by his great hunger, and it is the disappearance of Hae-mi that pushes him to the edge. Overcome by emotions he has been wrestling with for all his life, his frustrations boil over in an explosive outburst. There is an element of catharsis to the final moments of the film. As the audience has been teased with red herrings and false conclusions, there's a sense of satisfaction that comes from Jong-soo's actions. This is a clear nod to the influence of other Korean revenge thrillers like Oldboy or Scarlet Innocence, itself a deep acknowledgement of the Korean social concept of Han. That's explored in much more articulate detail in this video by Screened. The burning question at the heart of the film, did Ben kill Hae-mi, is left hanging. Depending on how you view the actions of Jong-soo, and whether you believe there is an element of magic realism at play, the viewer will take away an entirely different story. This leaves the viewer with an emptiness, a desire to fill in the details that aren't given to them. But beyond this, it connects the viewer to the character of Jong-soo. Jong-soo travels through life looking for answers in the wrong places. An aspiring writer living in the shadow of his father's crime, Jong-soo feels a deep burning within him, a rage that carries the film toward its final climax. It's a slow burn, and even if the final revenge is only imagined, there is a sense that this experience has changed Jong-soo, and burned down the greenhouse within him. For me, burning is a cautionary tale. Ambiguity is a part of life, and often it is the search for answers, rather than the answers themselves, that burns us to the ground.